Joining me now, Democratic Congresswoman from Texas, Jasmine Crockett. She is the vice-ranking member on the House Oversight Committee and now a newly minted member of the DOJ subcommittee. Welcome, my friend. It's good to see you. Let's get to what you'll be doing serving on this committee. It's led by Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene to provide oversight to DOJ's efforts. Do you know why they went after access to the federal government's payment system?
I have no idea, but I don't have any positive thoughts when it comes down to it. I appreciate that you played the clip of Jamie Raskin, and as you know, Congressman Raskin asked, why do you need access? I mean, here it is. I'm a wholly, fully elected member of Congress. I don't have that kind of access. So when you start talking about who should have access to literally the system that controls approximately $6 trillion of our dollars, I don't really understand, because the people that worked in those positions could only distribute money per the law. So why is it that the DOJ committee would have to have access? And that's not the place that you go to look for cuts. You look at our budget, which it is Congress that has the power of the purse. You look at our budget, you help the president come up with his proposed budget, and then the House and the Senate will decide what we send to his desk, and he gets to decide whether or not he signs it into law. He should not have access to this. And with people already having angst about Elon Musk and the things that he does as it relates to technology, this is not instilling anything more than another layer of fear, especially since normally when you are going to be in a position like that, you have to go through security clearances. And let me tell you, some people think security clearances are all about whether or not you have a warrant or not. No, they look at whether or not you have some sort of divided interest. They look at whether or not you have good credit. They look at so many other things. And we're talking about someone who's unelected, unvetted, and definitely unconfirmed, that is now literally sitting atop our $6 trillion, and we don't know what it is that he's doing, and we honestly don't know what role he has.
Look, you have well articulated some of the bad thoughts as you described them at the top here. The question is, does Musk's team now have the power to actually disrupt federal payments?
In my opinion, they do, but I honestly don't know. We still don't know really what DOJ is in the first place. I mean, listen, think about it like this, Alex. You know, everyone hates Congress. That's just what it is, right? But as a sitting member of Congress, I mean, I had to give up my ability to practice law. I am prevented from being able to practice law to prevent potentially somebody dropping a load of cash on me and I do something that is nefarious as one of 435. And now we're talking about a guy who literally gets government contracts from the United States and has not had to divest, has not had to, I mean, it is really awful. And I know right now people are asking whether or not their IRS refund checks are going to be affected. We don't know if this is more DEI. Are you going to say if it's somebody that's a person of color, then for some reason, whatever they paid in to the federal government, they're not allowed to get it back? Like, we don't know, but there is no reason for any political appointee, if you can even call him that, to have this kind of access. There's none.
Let me move to the fact that you are also a member of the Judiciary Committee, and since Donald Trump took office, multiple top FBI officials and federal prosecutors who all worked on January 6 cases, they're out of a job. And now the DOJ wants names of those who worked on the Trump or January 6 investigations for possible firing. What do you make of this apparent cleansing?
I mean, you just called it what it is. It's a cleansing. I mean, listen, when Democrats got out there and we said that our democracy was really at risk, people were like, oh, Democrats, you're out there, you're gaslighting. It's not our democracy. Well, he did say he'd be a dictator on day one. Oh, Democrats, you know, it's just Trump. He just talks. Well, let me tell you something. He is doing more than talking. We talked about Project 2025. We talked about the consolidation of power. We talked about how he wanted to be a king. We talked about in a democratic republic, that is not what it is. We have some sort of checks and balances, and he he is doing everything that he can to get rid of those checks and balances. The DOJ and the people that he's going after were simply doing their jobs. The problem is that Americans thought that it was okay to take a full-fledged criminal and make him the president of the United States, and then they want to act aghast when he does criminal things. Let me tell you, we have a thug in charge of the United States, and if we don't wake up, we may not have a United States, because right now he has only been successful in being a divider in chief.
Can you tell me what you're hearing about him from Republicans, from colleagues that will speak to you off the record? Do they have concerns about him? No names, but are you hearing concerns?
I do hear concerns, and let me make sure that I get this timeline together for the American people. Number one, he was sworn in on January 20th. That was on a Monday. We were supposed to be in session from Tuesday to Friday of that week. They canceled our Friday votes, so we have only been in session Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of the week that he was sworn in. No other days. They decided to take advantage of the fact that Congress was not in and started to unravel and break as many things in our democracy as they could without us being here. But I can tell you that even when we went through the CR vote, there were Republicans that silently or in the background were cheering us on and saying this is wrong. Like, they knew we had negotiated, and all of a sudden this guy who's not elected makes a tweet on Twitter. And so, no, can I tell you that Republicans want to see Elon go down? I can. Now, will they come out publicly and say that? No, because they're concerned about whether or not he'll spend money in their next elections. But there are some. But I need them to understand that this is their time to rise up and do what is right. This is the time to honor the oath that we all took. Listen, today I had to enter into agreement with Rand Paul, something that I never saw on my bingo card. But this is a guy who made it clear. This stupid tariff war is just that. It is dumb. And I have to agree, even when it's somebody like Rand Paul, I have to agree that he is absolutely correct.
So just specifically, what is Rand Paul saying that you said, yeah, I'm backing you up on this?
On the tariffs, he said that deciding to put these tariffs on Mexico as well as Canada, I don't think we'll ever scream too loudly about tariffs on China, but that's a whole other issue. But he was saying that it is going to take the cost of things up and that we should just call it what it is. This is a tax. It is a tax on Americans. And his attitude about it was, allegedly, the Republicans don't like to do taxes. So why are we raising taxes on the American people? But that's exactly what it is. It's a tax on us. We are the ones that are going to pay.
Can I just ask you, didn't you hear Donald Trump say many times during the campaign he was going to lower prices for the American people? Won't this have the opposite effect?
Now, you know, I tried to ignore a lot of the things that he said. But yes, he did say that. He did tell that lie. And we know we've got historic prices right now on eggs. For everybody that said they voted because of the price of eggs, they have only gone up. And just saying that you're going to lower something with only offering concepts of a plan was really the giveaway that he did not have a plan to help you lower the cost of food. Instead, as we are seeing these raids that are taking place, we know that we've heard from farmers that people aren't showing up to work. And the reality is that every single city that I've campaigned in, I would ask people, tell me how many of you plan on going into farming or sending your kids into farming. So you explain to me how that food is going to make it to the grocery store if there's no one that is actually willing to go out and work the fields. And now let's talk about the foods that we get out of Mexico, whether it's our avocados, whether it's our strawberries, the things that we import. Let's talk about what that's going to look like when Mexico says, oh, okay, well, they put a tariff on it. All that's being passed on to us. And then when it comes to people, especially in my state of Texas, where we are one of the largest traders in the world, not just the United States, but in the world, Texas is our own economy. And now our biggest trade partner, Mexico, is saying, you know what, we're going to slap these tariffs on. What does that mean? Those businesses that are doing trade are now going to be hit because people in Mexico may not be buying those items because now they are going to be too expensive.
It's always sobering to talk with you, I have to say, but you also managed to bring a smile to my face with your energy and personality. So thanks. Gotta say thanks for that as well. Representative Jasmine Crockett. I'll see you again soon.
It may feel like a year ago, feels like that to me, but the week started with the Trump administration releasing a memo that appeared to freeze all government spending. And that means every loan, every grant, all of it. They claimed the pause was intended to root out, and this is a direct quote because I can't make this up, Marxist equity, transgenderism, and Green New Deal social engineering policies, whatever that means. And sure, that might have sounded great to some MAGA diehards. I'm sure that's who it was written for. And some very online Republicans, just like deleting the entire FBI or 3/4 of it might sound good. But when that funding freeze actually happened, people across this country understandably freaked out. I mean, just listen to what local newscasts sounded like in the hours and days after that order.
The words that local agencies gave me today, chaotic and confusing.
Chaos and confusion.
Mass confusion.
Confusion. Even more confusion.
Widespread disruption in healthcare research, education programs, and other initiatives.
Several states, including Utah, reported error messages like this, warning of delays and/or rejections of payments.
Some Kansas City public service agencies couldn't access their federal fund portals.
Many local organizations tell us they are facing now an uncertain future.
If there's no change in the order, starting Monday, February 3rd, the building will be closed to children and staff.
You may have to lay people off or furlough them.
$14 million worth of projects that were coming into Kanawha County are on hold.
We really don't know what to expect. It's very scary.
It turns out, I mean, even when people are mad at Washington or mad at Congress, they like the stuff government does. It turns out people need the stuff government does in their communities. And the Trump White House did not seem to have any idea whatsoever what they'd done or the impact it might actually have. I think I'm sensing a bit of a theme here. How about you? Now, the next day, facing backlash from the American people and a federal judge, the White House kind of, sort of rescinded the memo, kind of, sort of, intentionally, in my view, making the situation even more confusing. And you may still be confused. But the whole thing was in keeping with their plan to just gut the federal government. And trust me, the thing is, the story is far from over. Because on Friday, a longtime, well-respected Treasury official was forced out of his job after a dispute with Elon Musk over granting him access to the federal payment system that is essentially the country's entire checkbook. I mean, the system is so sensitive that typically only a very small number of career officials have access to it. Paychecks to federal workers go through it. Social Security checks and tax refunds go through it. And sensitive personal information about everyone who gets those payments is in there, too. Well, yesterday, we learned that Elon Musk and his Doge posse have now been granted access to that federal payment system. So, yeah, I know this all sounds scary. And I'm not here to minimize the impacts of a president gutting the federal government and taking a wrecking ball to the Department of Justice. But that's why we're going to keep talking about it. Luckily, I do think the country is realizing just how important government can be. And all it took, I hate that this is the case, was a president trying to stop everything the government does. Joining me now is Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin of Maryland. He's the ranking Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee. He knows a lot about a lot of things, is my summary, too. I have so many things I want to ask you about, but I just want to start with this purge of FBI officials and January 6th prosecutors. You said in a statement, if allowed to proceed, Trump's purge of our federal law enforcement workforce will expose America to authoritarianism and dictatorship. I mean, you are a constitutional law expert. You choose your words carefully. Talk to me more about your concern here and where you think this could land.
Well, the dictators always try to move in against the police to seize that function. If you look at what's happened, Trump pardoned 1,500 violent insurrectionists, Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, seditious conspiracists, people who attacked cops, violently assaulted officers. Then they appointed, as the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, a guy who organized the January 6th violent festivities and assault and protest against the peaceful transfer of power and has been an election denier. And now they're proceeding to sack prosecutors who were involved in prosecuting January 6th, even if they were assigned to it. It's not as if they volunteered for that. In a lot of cases, they were just assigned to do it. They're sacking them for having anything to do with it. And the attack on the FBI is extraordinary because for decades it really has been an apolitical operation. There are Republicans who work there, independents, Democrats. They've served all administrations. And now, just because they were assigned to work on the most massive attack on the U.S. Capitol in American history and to prosecute cop assaulters, they're being fired, they're being investigated. And so there's this mass purge taking place, obviously coming from the top. What they're overriding and what we're standing on in the first wave of this is the civil service protections that people have. Even at the FBI, people have to have a due process administrative hearing before they're fired. Nobody in the civil service can be fired because of political reasons. That's the whole reason we have a civil service. The civil service exists so people aren't fired for political reasons, and the only justification being given for any of these firings, whether we're talking about prosecutors, FBI agents, people in other agencies, is we feel like you can't get with the president's program. You can't serve him. Of course, they haven't been given a chance. So these are apolitical, professional civil service people. They've not been given the chance. They're just essentially accused of guilt by association for doing their jobs before. And that's an amazing thing. So it's a very dangerous moment for the American people because the professional, independent civil service serves us. Mm-hmm. It's all of the laws and programs that Congress has adopted on behalf of the people, like Social Security, like Medicare, like the national parks, like the FBI itself, like prosecution. And suddenly they are trying to bring it directly under the control of the president for political purposes.
I just said in the opening, I mean, this is an ongoing story. There are amazing reporters reporting on it. But there is this list that is reportedly being created that could be made public of people who have worked on these prosecutions, investigated them in a variety of ways. Are you concerned about that list becoming public and a target being on the backs of these people as the January 6th insurrectionists were released?
Well, Enrique Tarrio, who's a leader of the Proud Boys, has posted online, I think this morning, the name of an FBI agent demanding her investigation and her arrest for various imaginary crimes he thinks that she has committed. So we're in a situation now where the pardoned criminals believe that they've got more power, and they're probably right, with the new government than FBI agents, than law enforcement officials, and then prosecutors. And they want a complete purge of the government to bring everybody directly under mega control.
For 2.5 centuries, America has prized its reputation as a global superpower, as the standard bearer for democracy, military might, and economic power. But 13 days into this second Trump administration, the velocity with which that reputation is evaporating around the world is alarming. America's credibility is at stake. President Donald Trump is ushering in an era of American leadership that is simply unserious. Now, that's not to say that the consequences of his actions are not deadly serious. It's to say that America is not behaving like a serious country. And that has been on display throughout the confirmation process for Trump's cabinet, the people who will lead the most powerful agencies in the country, and with that, the most powerful agencies in the world. Much has already been said about their qualifications or their mind-boggling lack thereof, but there is something to be said about the overall bizarre nature of some of these cabinet picks. It's the kind of stuff that would disqualify you from being the secretary of your local horticultural club, let alone some of the most influential positions in the country. There's Pete Hegseth, the former Fox News personality, an Army National Guard veteran who's been confirmed as Secretary of Defense despite a parade of controversies. Let's start small. Hegseth once admitted on live television that he hasn't washed his hands in 10 years. That's a weird flex, but okay. On a more serious note, Hegseth has been accused of drinking on the job. 10 current and former Fox employees told NBC News that Hegseth drank in ways that concerned his coworkers. Some said on some occasions they would smell alcohol on his breath before he went on air. A Trump transition official denied those allegations. During his confirmation hearing, Hegseth would not answer a yes or no question on whether he would resign as defense secretary if he were found to be drinking on the job. And there's been much concern about Hegseth's apparent treatment of women. In 2017, he was accused of sexual assault. He was never charged and says the encounter was consensual. He also says he was exonerated by the police who investigated the case. But exoneration is the official declaration of innocence after a legal process. That didn't happen here. Moving on to former South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem, who's been confirmed as Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. When she was governor of South Dakota, she was actually banned from setting foot in about 12% of the very state which she governed. Last May, all 9 Native American tribes in South Dakota agreed to banish Noem from the tribal land after she made disparaging remarks about Native American parents and pushed claims that tribal leaders were profiting off of drug cartels. At least one tribe lifted Noem's ban ahead of her confirmation hearings. It's unclear if the other 8 tribes plan to do the same. The irony of the Secretary of Homeland Security barred from stepping foot on the American homeland. Noem also made headlines late last year when Trump was reportedly considering her for vice president. Right around the time she was auditioning for the role, she released a memoir, and in it, she does a little oversharing, revealing that she once shot and killed the family dog, Cricket, because the dog was untrainable and had an aggressive personality. Cricket was a 14-month-old puppy. And yes, she voluntarily disclosed this. You shouldn't shoot your dog, but if you do on purpose, you probably shouldn't tell a lot of people about it. Noem tried to reframe the narrative, by the way, saying her willingness to kill her own rambunctious puppy proves something serious about her, that she can make tough decisions. Needless to say, that didn't quite land. Believe it or not, Noem is not the only cabinet pick who has a weird dead animal story. Enter Robert F. Kennedy Jr. RFK Jr. is up for the role of Health and Human Services Secretary. It's never quite clear where to start with him. There are, in fact, a couple of animal stories. Do you want the dead bear in Central Park story or the brain-eating worm story? Last year, RFK Jr. revealed that back in 2010, doctors found what they believed to be a parasitic dead worm in his brain. Doctors told him the worm likely, quote, got into my brain and ate a portion of it and then died, end quote. Also maybe a story I wouldn't spread too widely. Another voluntary admission from last year had to do with a cold case in New York's Central Park. 10 years ago, the carcass of a bear cub was dumped in the park. It left police and the city stumped. How did it get there? A decade later, RFK Jr. fessed up. In a video posted on X, he explained that when he was driving upstate when a car in front of him hit the bear. RFK then took the bear, the dead bear, and put it in his van with plans to save the meat in his refrigerator. Well, things get busy. One thing led to another. RFK got held up from getting home, somehow ended up in Manhattan with this whole extra dead bear in his car, so he dumped the bear in Central Park. One last story about RFK Jr. Recently, his cousin, Caroline Kennedy, wrote a letter to the Senate labeling RFK as a predator. In the long, scathing letter, she writes, quote, he enjoyed showing off how he put baby chickens and mice in a blender to feed his hawks. It was often a perverse scene of despair and violence, end quote. By the way, I haven't actually touched on the stuff that RFK could do that would actually jeopardize lives because he still appears to be a vaccine skeptic. The list of bizarre grievances against Trump's cabinet choices goes on. There's Kash Patel, the FBI pick who wants to dismantle the FBI, or Tulsi Gabbard, the pick for Director of National Intelligence, who's defended some of our biggest foreign adversaries and thinks the U.S. and NATO might be to blame for Russia's invasion of Ukraine. These are the people who are likely going to represent the United States on the world stage for the next 4 years. I mean, if this was written as an episode of Veep or The Office, the producers would turn it down for being too unbelievable. And like I said, there are actual concerns beside a lack of hygiene and a brainworm about these candidates and their fitness for their roles, concerns of the life and death variety that we've covered extensively on this show. But it doesn't matter, because despite the mountain of evidence that these nominees are not remotely qualified for their jobs, most have already been confirmed or are on their way to being confirmed. What does matter is how the world views America. From the outside looking in, we are becoming more of a laughingstock by the hour. It makes you wonder how our allies, or more crucially, our enemies, can possibly take this administration seriously. And if the other world leaders aren't laughing, they might be crying or screaming, worried about what another America First Trump presidency could bring. Last year, before Trump was reelected, Jackie Combs with the Los Angeles Times wrote, quote, they don't respect Trump at all, though they do fear him, the way you'd fear a madman at a nuclear button. President Nixon sought leverage by making foreign counterparts think he was unstable. Trump actually is unstable. Foreign diplomats and some leaders don't even mask their anxiety, end quote. As a trusted global partner, all you have is your reputation, and it starts right at the top. Joining me now, Ravi Agarwal, editor-in-chief of Foreign Policy and the host of FP Live, and Mehdi Hasan, an award-winning journalist and CEO and editor-in-chief of Zeteo. Gentlemen, good to see you both this morning. Mehdi, let's start about this. I don't know what's a bigger concern, the fear that our allies have, including Canada and Mexico now, where we started a trade war, or the danger that our enemies see us as weak and disorderly and disorganized.
Not just our enemies, Ali, and that's the problem. Good morning to you, by the way. It's not just our enemies, right? If it was just our enemies, it'd be like, okay, who cares about your enemies and your adversaries? Play your madman strategy. It's the idea of jeopardizing alliances, right? The U.S. is its alliances. The U.S. abroad, the strength of it comes from its reputation, from its ability to persuade and get other people to come along with it. Picking fights with your allies. I mean, I was the guy, Ali, as you know, who was warning about, look, Trump is not a dove. If he comes back into office, we're at risk of greater conflict. Are they going to have a war with Iran? He's put a bunch of hawks in his cabinet like Hegseth and Rubio. I didn't know I'd be the guy going on television like I am now saying, hey, I'm worried about a war with Denmark. I'm worried about a war with Panama. I'm worried about a war with Canada. I mean, the EU, you think I'm joking, the EU military chief, just for your viewers to be aware of this, the European Union's military chief said about a week ago, maybe we should put EU troops on Greenland. For the Russians? No, for us, for the Americans. That's insane, right? And you said allies. Canada sacrificed 165 people in Afghanistan to fight alongside the U.S. after 9/11. You're picking fights with Canada and Mexico. This is a great moment for China, the country that Trump thinks is the big enemy and he's going to crack down. If I'm the Chinese, I'm loving this moment. I'm calling up the Colombians, where he just picked a 24-hour trade war. I'm calling up all these countries in Latin America and Asia and Africa and saying, can you really trust the United States?
Yeah, no, and this is an important point to get to, Ravi, because there is opportunity for other people. If you always thought America was the solid ally, if you didn't doubt that your treaty, I mean, the USMCA, the treaty between Canada, Mexico, and Canada, followed NAFTA, which followed the free trade agreement between Canada and the U.S., which followed the Auto Pact. This is decades in the making, hard-won allies and alliances and trade negotiations. If that's not worth the paper it's written on, what exactly is?
I mean, this is not a new world order. This is a new world disorder. Trump is basically blowing up the last 80 years of the rules-based international system. You can argue that much of it wasn't working for a lot of countries, but this response to absolutely tear it apart is a whole other deal. I mean, Mehdi just referred to American allies, so the likes of Canada, Mexico, Colombia, all of the EU. They really must be thinking now, with a friend like America, who needs enemies? And, it's worth remembering the only time NATO's Article 5 has been invoked was to defend the United States after 9/11. But if you think of the world as divided into camps, you've got the allies, you've got the disruptors, for example, Russia, Iran, North Korea. I mean, they're looking at this moment and saying Trump is doing exactly what we need him to do. He's disrupting the very system that made America strong. But there are two other camps I'd like to mention very quickly. There's the opportunists, referred to that, India, Saudi Arabia, many countries in the global south. They see a lot of opportunities that they can cherry pick in a quid pro quo world. Ali, the thing I worry about the most is this fourth category of countries, smaller countries. If you're Sri Lanka, Somalia, Chad, good luck. I mean, the old system worked, flawed as it was, because it was a rising tide that tried to lift all boats. If you blow up that system, which is what trade and globalization and supply chains all over the world are built around, the biggest losers are the smallest countries. And it really seems that America first doesn't care about that.
This is an interesting point, Mehdi, because I think Ravi points out there are a lot of things about the 80-year-old world order that we're in that were not perfect, that didn't work, that were not entirely fair, and worthy of discussion and some degree of disruption. But that doesn't feel like what Donald Trump's doing. Donald Trump doesn't feel like I'm coming in to be a reformer, to actually improve on some of these things that are broken. It feels like it's really just breaking the China itself. And part of this is our position on foreign aid that seems to be, I don't even know what it is right now. Some foreign aid seems to be frozen. There's some websites that are not working. I don't even know where we are in the world of foreign aid at the moment.
So, Ali, a couple of things. One is, on the burn it down, you're 100% right. And that applies at home and abroad, right? There are people who voted for Trump at home because they legitimately did not like the system in Washington, D.C. They thought we have a corrupt political order. He'll burn it down. As you say, though, he's not a builder. He's a guy who just continues the chaos. Same abroad. A lot of us were very unhappy with the Biden administration's Middle East policies. I just came back from the Gulf, where they all think Trump is going to be better than Biden because Biden was so bad on Palestine and the rules-based order. But, of course, we know he won't be better. He's actually saying, let's clean out Gaza. He wants to make things worse. He does destroy things, not build things, despite pretending to be a builder. On the aid front, I'm so glad you raised that, Ali. I hope the viewers at home understand what is going on right now. We are in a massive, massive crisis, humanitarian crisis, which Trump has inflicted, a man-made crisis. He just flicked a switch and said no more aid overnight. And overnight, Ali, in places like Sudan, soup kitchens shut down. In Ukraine, people lost fuel and electricity. In Thailand, they turned away Myanmar war refugees from hospitals. In Cambodia, they shut down an anti-malarial program. People are talking about, ProPublica did a very good investigation pointing out that around 130,000 children in Africa may now be at risk of HIV, being born with HIV because their mothers have been cut off from HIV drugs under George W. Bush's PEPFAR program. That's all been shuttered by Marco Rubio and Donald Trump. It should be one of the biggest stories in America, if not the world. People are going to die because of what Donald Trump and Musk and Rubio have been doing in recent weeks. And also, if you don't have any moral concerns for these people dying, again, to go back to Ravi's point, your point, what does it say for America's reputation in the world? One of the few good things we had on the international stage was our foreign aid program.
In fact, I heard from a Canadian official, Ravi, who said if this moves forward, whatever happens, whatever comes of what looks like a renegotiation of our trade agreements with Mexico and Canada, whether you think it'll be better or worse, it has done such irreparable damage to some of the deepest relationships that the world understood existed. Mehdi makes the point. Canadians, when America goes to war, Canadians go to war with them to help. This has done irreparable damage that may be generational.
Absolutely. I mean, look, and it was one thing in the first term where, many could argue this is a blip. America will sort of somehow correct itself. But this time it really doesn't feel that way. I mean, other leaders around the world, they really get the sense that this is the new American normal. This is what American people want again. And there's a sense that there's a sort of drunkenness over hard power and the way in which it can be wielded and used and deployed around the world, maybe in the short term to help American interests or however you define American interests. But what about soft power? And I think to throw the baby out with the bathwater in terms of whether it's aid, in terms of whether it's, America's human rights record, flawed as it is, we can all agree with that, but at least the intention was often to try and do better. The rhetoric around democracy promotion, again, incredibly flawed as it was, misused in many ways, think of the Iraq War, but again, aspiring to do something better. When you throw all of that away, it really raises the question, what do you stand for other than an exertion of hard power? And then look at it this way, if you ever are in trouble, who stands up for you? What rules still remain and exist that could defend you, that could create a system that you could fall back on? All of that, much as though Trump supporters in this current moment may be celebrating some of his moves, maybe looking at how Colombia was forced to capitulate and may see that as a victory. But longer term, when those receipts come in, they could be costly.
Guys, thanks very much for this conversation. Ravi Agarwal is editor-in-chief of Foreign Policy. Mehdi Hasan is the CEO and editor-in-chief of Zeteo.
Joining me right now, we have the Canadian ambassador to the United States, Kirsten Hillman. Ambassador, welcome. Thank you on this very important day. There's a lot of questions. I need you to help us understand what is happening here, because Canadian officials, they've been in talks with the Trump administration, and yet these tariffs are set to take effect on Tuesday. First of all, can I even ask if there's a status of negotiations? Are there negotiations underway?
Well, what we have been doing, and thank you very much for having me, what we have been doing since December, since the president, even before the president took office and was expressing concerns around the northern border, illegal migration and fentanyl, we have been in discussions with his team on that. And just to put this into context, obviously, these are important issues. They're important to Canada. They're important to the United States. But Canada is not a source of fentanyl into the U.S. Less than 0.5% of what the fentanyl that has been seized in the U.S. has come from Canada, and less than 1% of the people who come into the United States illegally come from the northern border. So it's a very small issue. That being said, important. And as I say, border security is important on both sides of the border. We only want people in our country who have the legal right to be there as well, and we certainly don't want drug trafficking into our country. So we have been in discussion with the Trump team since December about the president's concerns, and we acted on those concerns. We have invested $1.3 billion Canadian dollars, which is about $1 billion US, in buying new equipment, getting new infrastructure, new technology for the border, and then new partnerships with the U.S. and with the Trump administration to root out organized crime and fentanyl. And we're already seeing results. We had, since about 4 months ago, we've had an 89% drop in irregular, illegal migration from Canada into the United States. And remember, again, it's an 89% drop from less than 1% of your total flows. So lots of success, lots of results already, lots of new partnerships that have already started. Had a really good, important exchange with Tom Homan, the border czar, on Friday, and senior members of his team walking through plans that we can do together. We've got a Canadian team and a team from the White House going to China to talk to them about precursors to really get at that problem. So in that sense, I don't know if I'd call those negotiations, because really it's more of a collaboration, but that's been ongoing for a while now.
You mentioned December was the start. Do you know if the president, either prior to his inauguration 2 weeks ago now or since, has been involved directly in the talks?
So the president has talked to our prime minister about this, and my understanding is that he has been briefed on it. That's what I've been told, on the plan and on the results that have already been achieved.
Okay. And yet the tariffs go into effect on Tuesday. Let me mention what J.D. Vance, our vice president, posted just a short time ago. Here's the quote. Spare me the sob story about how Canada is our best friend. I love Canada and have many Canadian friends, but is the government meeting their NATO target for military spending? Are they stopping the flow of drugs into our country? I'm sick of being taken advantage of. You've just very eloquently shared the stats about particularly drugs coming into the country from Canada, and they less than 1% in terms of fentanyl crossing your border into ours. But your reaction to this, and what is the United States telling you it would take to stop the tariffs from going into effect on Tuesday? Is there a chance that would happen?
I mean, we're being told that these tariffs are being put into place because of the border, because of fentanyl and because of irregular, illegal migration. And as I say, we have really leaned into that. We have expended a lot of money to put more boots on the ground, to buy more equipment, to enhance our partnership with U.S. law enforcement and border enforcement. And we have asked, what more would you like us to do? Is there more that you need? Is there something missing here? And, you know, there's nothing that has come back as an additional ask. So we're focusing on what is being asked in relation to this specific action. And as I say, I feel that we have done a lot, where we think that we're obviously demonstrating results already in terms of the concern that the president has raised. But if there's more, let's talk about it. But to date, there hasn't been more that's been put on the table in this particular, on this particular topic.
And yet that quote that I read you from our vice president, how do you interpret the tone of that? There are a couple of others that are similar in tone that I'm looking at.
I don't know. I mean, I think that those are questions for them. I think that what I can say is that we are coming at this discussion with a full spirit of openness and willingness to collaborate and discuss any concern or issue or request that comes from the Trump administration. But we need to have a conversation about that is organized, right? The conversation around the border was fairly clear. What they were hoping for was clear, and we responded. If there are other things that are of interest, they haven't been articulated to us formally. So I guess we'll have to wait and see if they are.
Do you know what the president means when he says that the U.S. is subsidizing Canada to the tune of $200 billion?
I'm afraid I can't answer that question. Canada and the United States have a vast trading relationship. We have almost $1 trillion trading relationship. That trading relationship is complementary. So you sell us more manufactured products than we sell to you. You have a manufacturing surplus with Canada, a services surplus with Canada, equipment, vehicles, all this sort of thing. We buy more from you than we sell to you. But in terms of energy, a third of what we sell into the United States are energy products. And those energy products, quite frankly, if you talk to our oil-producing regions of the country, they feel they're selling them at a very fair, if not discounted rate, because we don't have a lot of infrastructure or geography to sell them to anyone else. And that product fuels your businesses, fuels your refineries, and keeps energy prices low for American consumers and American businesses. So I think that if you talk to our energy sector, I think they might feel that if there's any country that is getting a bargain in this situation, it is probably the United States. But that being said, happy to try and understand a little bit more what the president is talking about. Our deficit, our trade deficit in goods with the United States is $64 billion. In other words, we sell $64 billion more of goods to you than you sell to us, and that is entirely because of energy. And if you add services to that, it's about half the amount. And if you take energy out, you have a massive trade surplus with us. So I don't really know where the numbers come from, and I'm not sure where the 200 comes from.
President Trump has included a retaliation clause promising further action if any country retaliates with higher tariffs. Does this threat concern the Canadians?
You know, something that was really apparent yesterday and continues to be very apparent today is that Canadians across the country, all levels of our government, are determined to respond to what Canadians feel are unfair actions based on the actions that we have taken and are willing to take to address the concern that the president has expressed. They feel that this doesn't make a lot of sense. We have just renegotiated the USMCA under the Trump administration in their first administration. That deal brings us to zero tariffs, essentially 99% tariff free between our two countries. And so I think Canadians feel like, well, wait a minute, those are the rules that apply between our two countries. And if the rules are going to be set aside, then we're going to have to react. So I don't think Canadians would accept their government, and it's clear from the reaction over the last less than 24 hours, they won't accept the government not standing up and being strong in the face of, I think, what they feel are tariffs coming in relation to an area of concern that we have worked very, very hard to address.
Which brings me to my last question to you, Ambassador. What has been the reaction in Canada to Trump calling for Canada to become the 51st state of the United States?
Well, look, I'll be honest. I think that Canadians, we take it as a bit of ribbing, a bit of joking. Some people find the joke funny, some don't. But Canadians are very proud. We're just as proud of our country and of being Canadian as Americans are of their country and being Americans. So I think that pretty much every Canadian is interested in keeping it that way.
You should be very proud. Canada's a great country, and I love visiting. Canadian Ambassador to the United States, Kristen.
Stroke of a pen on Saturday night, Donald Trump thrust the country into a possible trade war with its neighbors and risked higher prices on everyday goods for millions of Americans. The president signed an executive order issuing a 25% tariff on goods coming into the U.S. from Canada and Mexico, as well as a 10% tariff on goods from China. The move has forced leaders of America's closest allies to issue stark warnings of what's to come. Here's Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
Like the American tariffs, our response will also be far-reaching and include everyday items such as American beer, wine, and bourbon, fruits and fruit juices, including orange juice, along with vegetables, perfume, clothing, and shoes. It'll include major consumer products like household appliances, furniture, and sports equipment, and materials like lumber and plastics, along with much, much more.
Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum promised her country would also retaliate with tariffs on American imports. She said tariffs wouldn't solve America's problems, but dialogue might. Joining us now is our colleague Chris Hayes, host of All In on MSNBC and the author of the new book, The Siren's Call, How Attention Became the World's Most Endangered Resource.
Chris, welcome to the table this morning, man.
It's great to be here.
The Siren's Call is really about the ability to grab and hold attention. Well, guess what? I think Canada and Mexico is sort of grabbing attention right now. When you're looking at the response to these tariffs, these Trump tariffs, NBC News is reporting what actually could be impacted here, noting the sweeping tariff could make more expensive a host of items that the U.S. imports from its neighbors. Among the common Mexican imports that will now get pricier to bring into the country: fruits, vegetables, beer, liquor, and I emphasize the beer and liquor part for a certain part of our country, and electronics. And from Canada, potatoes, grains, lumber, and steel. Do you think at some point the Trump voters will connect the dot that these taxes are going to be paid by them, and this is not necessarily going to hurt the folks back in Canada and Mexico?
That is the big question. I mean, one of the things that was so strange about the campaign, the strangest thing about the campaign, was that everyone agreed that the number one issue in America, the number one source of discontent, was inflation and higher prices. And one of the two major candidates, Donald Trump, was explicitly running on an agenda and campaign promised to raise prices. And this was clear as day. And for some reason, no one listened. Wall Street, up until yesterday, was saying that the tariffs aren't going to happen. He clearly believes in tariffs. He also seems to have a vendetta against our closest allies. It's very strange that he seems like, why is China 10% and Mexico and Canada 25%? I thought the whole thing was that he was going to get tough on China. He's a China hawk. China's been screwing. Why is China 10%? And the other thing you got to say here that's so wild is the current tariff structure between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico is set by an agreement that was negotiated by Donald Trump's administration the first time around. It's the agreement that they made.
Except that you know that this isn't really about trade, right? This is about him trying to villainize some of our greatest trade partners and allies, and especially, I think, in the case of Mexico, to sort of reframe this as a question that's really about immigration and fentanyl when it has nothing to do with that. Let me read you the statement from Claudia Sheinbaum. She writes, "We categorically reject the White House's slander of the government of Mexico, alleging alliances with criminal organizations, as well as any intention to interfere in our territory. If the United States wants to combat the criminal groups that traffic drugs and generate violence, we must work together in a comprehensive manner, but always under the principles of shared responsibility, mutual trust, collaboration, and above all, respect for sovereignty, which is non-negotiable. Coordination, yes. Subordination, no. But he only speaks the language of power. So actually coming together and having that type of relationship would seem impossible for him."
Yeah, and I think you're right about this sort of the necessary role of demonization. I mean, to Michael's point when we started off of part of Donald Trump's, key sort of way of operating, as I write in the book, is this attentional dominance, even if it's negative attention. And he understands that conflict drives attention. So he's picking fights because that is what drives attention. But the scarier thing here, and this is the thing that hasn't set in, it hasn't set in when you talk to Republicans, people on Wall Street, he has a pathological obsession with tariffs. He genuinely, truly believes. Yes, it's part stunt. Yes, it's part demonization. But also, you can't move him off this idea, this wrong-headed idea that tariffs are the solution to all of America's problems.
Simone, I was thinking of you last night. Did you notice? I went into my email and there were 5 different emails from the White House, as though they put out 5 statements from this. And I was thinking of you as someone who has done that work before, where it's it didn't project confidence. Right?
No.
When you actually believe that what you're going to do is work, you're here's the thing, we're doing it. It felt like they kept explaining.
Yes, and I think honestly, when the Wall Street Journal editorial board, which is the the editorial board, not the right wing, but still conservative, when they are smacking you down, I do think that there is this need to kind of flood the zone, if you will, with information that says, no, this is a good thing, this is a good thing. I think that those statements were a little bit more for the president and less for anyone else in Washington, D.C. or across the country. But, you know, the reality is there are going to be real implications for this. I thought, because I was placing my orders yesterday, I'm not going to lie. And these tariffs, they will take effect on Tuesday. Anything shipped before Saturday will not be affected. But this is something that goes directly to kind of what people can feel and see. And Chris, I was thinking about your book in this, and you talk about how, we've got sirens now all in our lives. Sirens are meant to compel. Anybody that knows sirens from the mythologies, if you will. But now we've got sirens all throughout our lives, going off in our bedrooms, on our TVs, everywhere. And it seems to me that the tariffs are will be directly connected to people's everyday lives. It's something people can feel. It's real for folks, and that will be something that grabs their attention.
Yeah, I mean, one of the tests here, right, is like how much, there's a real open question about how much what people pay attention to is actually organic in some sense of like what hits them and what is mediated through the attentional environment. And I think there's this idea a little bit that like the reality outs in the end, and it's not quite clear that's true. Like it is true that pocketbook issues drive people. I think people will start to see those prices, but there's also storytelling that has to go along with that. I mean, when we had the big supply chain crunches back in the early parts of the Biden administration, there was tons of storytelling about that wasn't just, oh, my lumber's more expensive, right? So part of the role here, I think, for the Democratic Party, for independent journalists, is to actually tell the story in an intentionally compelling way about what's going on, because their job is to sort of distract from that or to draw attention in the places they want to draw it, particularly Trump. But this question of like, will people start to see it and put that together is a little bit of an open question. I think they will, but I don't think it's guaranteed.
Chris, what do you think the siren call is for Trump relative, because you touched on it, relative to these three players, Mexico, Canada, and China? My assessment is, yeah, he projects he hates China. Everything is, China bad, China bad. Yet they're not penalized here the way our allies are, our friends to the north and the south. Instead of, let's negotiate a border deal with Mexico and Canada if you're concerned about fentanyl and drugs coming. Oh, by the way, Donald Trump, the largest, purveyor of fentanyl coming into the country are United States citizens, right, not Mexicans. So just so you know. What do you think that siren call is for him relative to China? What is he hearing that actually weakens him when it comes to China? A lot of bloviating, not much agitation with respect to things like tariffs.
So here is a consistent thing that he's done. I think he likes the attention that conflict draws. He likes conflict with allies as opposed to actual adversaries. He is routinely and consistently picking fights, tougher on, getting into conflicts with allies, and sort of, extremely generous to adversaries. I mean, look at the way he talks about Russia, obviously, the fact that China's getting off relatively cost-free here compared to allies, but look at the way he talks about NATO, the way he talks about Canada, the way he talks about Mexico. Like, what it is for him is he likes the conflict, he likes to project strength, but he's sort of a coward fundamentally. And the stakes of actual conflict and fights with adversaries is much higher. And so this is a way of kind of a little bit of bullying and cake and eat it too, where he can play tough against Justin Trudeau, which is a very different thing than playing tough against Xi.
And I just know it's what he did with it's what he does with Gavin Newsom or any Democrat he says he doesn't like. He's all talk and then he gets on the top and like, hey, how you doing?
Yeah.
It's great. Good to see you.
And he says it like that. Hey, how you doing?